Okay. Okay, good. Shavua Tov to everyone. Good luck. Next Sunday, we're going to do a shiur on Tu B'Shvat, okay, which will be dedicated to discussing the holiday of Tu B'Shvat as well as laws associated with blessings. That's for next week. For today, we're going to continue in our course that we began, and we're in the midst of the morning blessings. The morning blessings going through each individual bracha, why it is said, and any halachas associated with it, especially that are pertinent to women. You cannot say the bracha. Why do I say poskim who say, meaning that some say you could say the blessing? Because we already mentioned in our previous class that one of the reasons behind the blessings is not just for a personal benefit, but a benefit that Hashem created for the world, for the populace. And even a blind person benefits from the fact that other people can see. That's why they have dogs, and they have people that help them. If nobody could see, it would be much different. But since Baruch Hashem, other people can see, so there is an approach to say that they too should say the Bracha B'Ke'ach. Practically, they do not do so. A blind person would not say this blessing. They say without Hashem's name, but they would not say the bracha because of the dispute. The blessing of Matir Asurim. The bracha of Matir Asurim goes on the fact that when a person's sleeping, their limbs are asleep. Their limbs are bound. He doesn't move. And when he wakes up, he's able to stretch around and move around. So the Matir Asurim is going on the ability to no longer be constrained. It's connected with the next bracha, Zekev Kefufim. Zekev Kefufim then goes on the next step. First is getting the ropes untied. You have the potential of moving. And that leads to them being able to physically move. Zekev Kefufim is getting up, bending, straightening up your back from a crouching position, sleeping position. But since, in essence, you can't do one without the other. In other words, you can't do Zekev Kefufim without doing Matir Asurim first, right? You can't get up and move around if you didn't have the constraints removed from you. Therefore, you have to follow the order of first saying Matir Asurim and then Zekev Kefufim. The person accidentally mixes up the order and he says first Zekev Kefufim, and then he was like, oh, I forgot Matir Asurim, let me say that quickly. You can't say it anymore. Because you cannot get up and stretch if you're bound up. How are you going to stretch if you're bound up in saran wrap? If you're sleeping. So bichlal masay yimana, and therefore the halacha is that in a case that a person mixed up this order of Zekev Kefufim and Matir Asurim, the Shulchan Aruch writes that he can no longer say the blessing of Matir Asurim. So that's why it's always a good idea to look inside the siddur for a number of reasons. Reason number one, to say it in the right order. Reason number two, to say it. Because when we don't look inside of the siddur, when we say brachas, quite often we forget what we're up to, what we said, what we didn't say, and it becomes a big mess. So that's an additional reason why it should be said inside the siddur. Malbish Harumim, the blessing of Malbish Harumim is literally on the pshat level, going on the fact that we have clothing to wear to protect us, protect our bodies for modesty purposes. So that's the first aspect of this blessing. Another aspect based in Kabbalah, we brought this last week as well. The Arizal explains that every single day an individual receives a new levush, a new garment of the soul to be able to work with. Let's explain this a little more in depth. Our character and our personalities are very complex, as I'm sure all of us know. And they're made up of a lot of different aspects that, when they're all put together, affect mood swings, affect different moods and different state of minds that we're in. So if a person wakes up, some people have bad morning day. They wake up in a bad mood. It's not necessarily because Hashem accidentally gave them some villain's neshama. It could also be that he's with his own neshama, but the levush that he got today, the new garment of expression, is corroded, or it's having it had some difficulty, some issues with it. In other words, that there's a soul, a godly soul that every single Jew has, and an animal soul, and then there is the garments of the soul that it helps express it. Now, sometimes the neshama itself can cause a person to be inclined towards a certain predisposition of, as the Alter mentions in the first chapter of Tanya, you have some people which are more jolly, some people which are more sad, more depressed, more smart, more stupid. It exists, and these are the things that are often embedded within the essence of the person's soul, where the root comes from of the soul, etc. But then you have things that the soul is okay, the soul is good, the soul is not inclined towards depression, but the levush, the garment that this soul has received, is a garment that is inclined towards that. So the Arizal says that every single day a Jew wakes up with it's a renewed levush, it's a renewed garment. And that's why we can understand that we wake up with so many different moods every single day throughout our lives. Why is that? I mean, we're the same person, we just got re-energized. What's going on? So you can explain it based on the foods you eat, which I'm sure also has some effect, and how much sleep you got, and what was your last conversation before you went to sleep, what kind of dreams did you have? Yeah, you have people that have dreams, You dream you got into a fight with your spouse, and you wake up and you're really upset at your spouse, right? So obviously there's a lot of effects. The Rizal's approach here is that there's also a mystical effect here, which is based on the levushon a person gets. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in the end of chapter 2, explains that this is likewise one of the very important reasons of why intimacy has to be done in a holy manner, because even if a child can receive a holy soul, irrelevant of who his parents are or are not, the levushim, the garments, which is basically his form of expression, are directly created as a result of the type of intimacy that took place. And that can affect whether a child will have refined levushim, will have refined expressions, or will have more coarse and more difficult. So this is the Malbish Harum that we bless Hashem for, that we have received new spiritual garments to work with. That's what's always a good idea. You see, this day is just not working out. The levushim are terrible. Go to sleep for the night. Take an early night off. Wake up early. You get your new levushim. Try it. It works. Obviously not 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's kind of difficult to sleep for the night. But,
something I heard once, not to go to sleep with the same clothes we were during the day.
Not to go to sleep in?
With the clothes we were during the day. It's good to change clothes for the night.
I haven't seen any source mentioning such a concept. I've heard of it just like you have, but I've never seen any source bring such a thing down. But we could say that since part of the nigla, simple aspect of Mabel Sharum is that you got dressed. I mean, the Arizal's approach is very nice, but we can't remove that from the pshat. The pshat is that you put on clothing. How are you putting on clothing if you slept in your clothing? Unless you're changing it when you wake up. But if you're sleeping in your clothing, then it's a little difficult to say Baal B'Sharumim unless you follow the widespread custom. You say based on the worldly benefit, not your personal benefit. So that is a reason. But it's a minhag of all of humanity to a concept called pajamas, right? If people want to sleep in clothing, why would there ever be pajamas? So there's night clothing. Okay. The bracha v'nosein la ya'ef koyach. This next blessing, v'nosein la ya'ef koyach, is an interesting bracha because all the blessings that so far we have said and that we will say for the remainder are pretty much, with exception, recorded in the Talmud, recorded in the Gemara, in Maseches Brachas 60b. And that, of course, is the source of the brachas. Now, Haneisen Le'af Kayach, interestingly, is not recorded in the Talmud. So where does this blessing come from? Now, we know that if a blessing did not have Talmudic startup, if it wasn't initiated, if it wasn't enacted by the sages of the Talmud, then you can't just come along today and make up a blessing. A person can't come, even if we all agree, if somehow miraculously all the Jewish people will agree to a certain blessing, you still can't say the blessing, as we're past the days of the Talmud. And the ability to be able to coin blessings is no longer available until Mashiach comes, until we have the Sanhedrin. The truth is that they're related. Since today we're dispersed and we don't have a Beis Din Haggadah that everyone accepts, therefore a blessing that will be enacted will never be accepted by all the Jewish people, and therefore it cannot be put into the normal blessings that we say. If miraculously all the Jewish people would somehow agree to a certain blessing, maybe they would be willing to talk. In any event, what happened here with the case of Anais and Le'av Koach? So Anais and Le'av Koach was instituted in the times of the Geonim, in the Geonic period, which was the Talmudic period. The Mishnaic period was in between years 200 and 300, and then we have the Talmudic period, which was between 300, give or take, to 500. So the Gaonic period was between 700 to 1,000. So we're talking about a number of hundred years, a few hundred years later, and they enacted this blessing of Hanes and Le'av Koach. For what reason? What suddenly happened that we say this bracha? I mean, it makes sense to always say it, right? You go to sleep tired, and most people go to sleep tired, and you wake up re-energized. So why didn't the sages have us say this bracha? So the truth is, we already pretty much covered the re-energizing in different blessings. Remember, we spoke about Olikai Neshama, that's the re-energizing of the soul. We spoke about Ashiyatzar, the re-energizing of the body. So it's pretty much already covered. So why do we need a new bracha of Anais and Le'av Koach? It's not written in the Talmud. It seems superfluous. How can we say it's a bracha levatala? So the explanation is as follows. But due to this question, by the way, there are poskim who negate this bracha. There are poskim who say you can't say this bracha. It's a blessing in vain.
No, this time?
They would maintain their opinion even today. Their opinion never changes. We don't follow their opinion.
Okay.
But they do. Now, they're not alive anymore, but that's a technical dysfunction. That doesn't mean their opinion is obsolete. They hold to their opinion.
Maybe they're still not saying it today.
In heaven. The Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch records this dissenting opinion and negates it. So this is we can enter into a few discussions here of what suddenly happened that we're allowed to say this blessing if it wasn't Talmudically coined, and that's the way we rule that it could be said. But before we do that, let's go into first the reason. Why did the Geonim need to do this if we just said it's superfluous? So they write something very interesting. The Geonim saw that a weakness, a physical weakness, a new physical weakness had descended onto the world in their generations. And because of that, they instituted a new bracha to be said, because when we wake up in the morning, we get re-energized against that new weakness. What does this mean? Now, nobody here is from before the time of the Geonim, right? Nobody's lived in a period that they can remember in this lifetime where you were before the weakness and after the weakness. Say, yeah, I understand. That's So we don't really know what this means. But we do find this concept of that a weakness has fallen onto the world. Meaning, very simply, we're physically weaker people. Like back then, we could bench press 120. Now we can do maybe 50. Okay, we're physically weaker. We find this in a few different halachas that it's expressed. Number one, it used to be children starting from age 11, male and female, would all fast on Yom Kippur. It's halacha. They had to fast Yom Kippur based on chinuch, Rabbanan, not biblically, rabbinically, just like they follow all the rabbinicals. And the Shulchan Aruch writes that since today we are a weaker generation, therefore, and this is already written 400 years ago, therefore the custom is not to do so anymore, and children do not fast on Yom Kippur until they are bar bas mitzvah. So we see that an initial rabbinical obligation became obsolete, became changed, because of the fact that nowadays we are weak. We find this also in other halachas regarding other matters, that because today we're considered weaker, therefore the halacha has changed.
Why are we weaker?
So why? Well, that's a good question. I don't know why we have less koach, energy to do things. What we can say is that the concept we know called Yeridas Haderes, of descent of the generation. Just like spiritually we become more distant, so too physically, our body becomes more weak and more fatigued, and so if we were able, when Mashiach comes, we can do the Olympics of today's generation versus 10 generations ago. Nobody will win from today's generation, because they're just so much more powerful and have more strength. The Arizal, however, also interprets this as a spiritual weakness. saying the following. And we know in the Gaonic period, but mainly Gaonic Rishonik period, there was a tremendous widespread of heresy, whether it be from the Christians, which were of course originally Jews and trying to get Jews into their net of heresy, or afterwards with the Karaites. The Karaites were huge. They were huge in the times of the Gaonic. Almost all Egyptian Jewry were Karaites. They had hundreds of thousands of followers. Today there's maybe one or two shuls left. They're almost extinct. They're like a museum today. But back in the day, they were very, very powerful. They had a lot. The Sadia Gaon had to write many, many letters to oust the Karaites, and there was a lot of politics. It wasn't simple at all. So, in order to strengthen the Jewish people against these positions of heresy, they instituted a bracha to give strength, spiritual strength, to be able to upstand against this spirit. And obviously, I don't think much has changed since then in this respect, and therefore the blessing, when we say the blessing, listen of Kaich, we should have in mind both on the physical renewal of strength and as well as the spiritual renewal of strength to be able to overcome the different intimidations that we face against our service of God.
And our own shortcomings.
Yeah. So going back to how we can say, if we found a reason, but finding a reason is not enough to justify making up a bracha that was not around in Talmudic times. So the way the Alter Rebbe explains this is as follows. He says, when do we say that that you need to have a blessing be from Talmudic times to be an act? That's only in the case where majority of Klal Yisrael do not accept it upon themselves. But if the majority of the Jewish people accept a certain blessing that was instituted by the Jewish leaders, the Goyim, then those two factors of A, being established by the Goyim, and B, being accepted by the Jewish people, that makes it be considered valid, and that you can say it is not considered a blessing in vain. And this idea we can use with many other blessings. There's many brachas that we say today which are not found in the Talmud, really. I'll give you an example. We all say a bracha upon lighting Shabbos candles. The blessing of the Hadlik Ner Shel Shabbos or Shel Shabbos Kodesh, depending on whatever nusach you use, is not written in the Talmud. The first to write about it are the Gaonim. Sadia Gaon, in the Sefer Siddur the Rasag, writes the following: there are some people who say a blessing Hadlik Ner Shel Shabbos when lighting the Shabbos candles. What do you mean some? If you have to say it, you say it. If you don't have to say it, you don't say it. But what does it mean, some people? So we see that the word brachas that we're getting into the custom of being said, even though they weren't directly established or obligated in Talmudic times, and they're all based on this concept of if it's given the haskama of the Go'ainim, and the majority of Klal have accepted it upon themselves, then it would be valid. Can this apply today? So, first of all, we're past the Gaonic period, and number two, it's really not possible today for blessings to spread amongst all Klal Yisrael. Today, you can hardly spread a takana in your own group, in your own sect, let alone all the sects of Judaism. This is today, as the Rebbe once said, when someone said, "I have a great idea. Let all the Gedolei Yisrael of all the different chugim of all the different sects of Judaism all come together. We'll have a convention and we'll unanimously put out different proclamations that are necessary for Klal Yisrael." And he said, "I think it's a great idea. Let's wait for Mashiach to come." In other words, that unfortunately it's not something that we can actually think of realistically doing, as we clearly see. The Rebbe was actually very against, not just the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rayatz, were all very against the Rabbinical Conventions because of this reason that what was really a Rabbinical Convention, I'm not talking about all Rabbinical Conventions, but the idea of having Rabbinical Conventions inviting Rabbanim from all streams of Jewry was that basically you're putting yourself in danger that majority wins, as that's how it works. So that would basically shut the mouth of the minority, which, as we know, quite often the minority is in the right, not always is the majority in the right. So therefore they were very, very vehemently against the ideas of these rabbinical conventions, which were often a stretched hand of the government to try to uproot a certain idea or custom from the Jewish people, and they just wanted the rabbinical stamps on it.
So did they boycott the conventions?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah.
Because they've had them for years and years.
Well, I don't know which conventions you're referring to. First and foremost, we're referring to conventions that would invite members of, conservative or reform jury. That goes without question. But even of in Europe or Russia, Daily Yisrael, they did not send representatives. They did not join because of this worry. There were conventions that they were forced to join in. There were conventions that Rabbi Shab joined in, Rabbi Yas joined in. I'm not exactly sure what the difference between those were, and the other ones, it could be maybe one was government, it was made by the government, requested by the government, others weren't. I'm not sure, but in general we have a number of letters that go in the direction of not to join these conventions. Okay. Our next bracha, Reika ha'aretz al hamayim, is a blessing that we say, thank Hashem for volcanoes. What do I mean for volcanoes? Well, we all know how islands are formed, right? Where everything used to be land, everything used to be sea, water, and Hashem erupted and made land appear. Reika ha'aretz al hamayim, right, is going on that Hashem created land for us to live on, right? Anyone, maybe here in Israel we don't feel that so much, but if you live in Hawaii, you are Reika ha'aretz al hamayim, because that used to be down under until we had an explosion of lava. And perhaps the whole world was created that way. Maybe not. Maybe yes. We don't know. I mean, we're all sitting on lava. The whole world is inside the centrosphere of the Earth. But it doesn't say exactly how.
Mount Hermon was lava?
I have no idea. I mean, officially all mountains you dig deep enough you'll get somewhere. It's like water, right? The inside of the Earth has a layer of water, has a layer of lava. It's just that volcanoes have holes that receive from it. There's been drilling done, but technically, if anyone ever tried, deep diving in the Earth, then they would eventually reach. I mean, they obviously wouldn't be able to reach it because you know what would happen. But in any event, okay. So this bracha is going on in Reika ha'aretz al hamayim, thanking Hashem that we have land to stand on. We shouldn't take that for granted that we can stand on land. I was reading in the late 1800s there was a volcanic explosion in the Philippines, and it killed like 300,000 people, and it like totally covered over all these islands, like completely, like no more. The islands don't exist anymore; they're underwater. But it's like we take for granted these things, and so this is something you can have in mind. Reika ha'aretz al hamayim.
There are floods also.
Floods, correct. Yeah, usually floods they rescind afterwards. They go in and they rescind. These were completely covered over. Okay, Shasali Koltsarki. So this is an interesting bracha because we would think that it goes on, thank you Hashem for giving me everything that I need, all my needs. But in truth, in Halacha we find it goes on something very specific and kind of weird about what it's going on. It goes on wearing shoes, and what type of shoes? Leather shoes. What's wrong with Nike, Reebok? These are good shoes also. But for whatever reason, they chose only the leather shoes. I don't know why, but in Halacha we find a specification regarding leather. We know on Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, the negation is specifically leather shoes. We know in Avil, a mourner, the negation is specifically leather shoes. Now, one approach is because leather shoes are very strong and they resist water. They are able to resist stones, and they protect the foot, and other footwear of those times could not, and that's why some places can say you can't wear other comfortable shoes on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur or during Avelus, during Shiva, because you're missing the whole point of why we don't wear leather shoes. But that's not the way we hold. The way we hold is specifically leather. It's based on the pasuk that minal shoes are made of leather. What is the spiritual connection here? I don't know. I haven't seen anything on this, but that's what it specifically goes on leather, and therefore on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av we do not recite the blessing of Sha'asa Li Kol Tzarki, because we cannot wear leather shoes, so we don't say the bracha. Nonetheless, as the Yisai B'Sher Shalveda writes, one should also have in mind in this bracha all the other physical benefits, even though that's not the initial reason and cause of inception. Nonetheless, in its wording, it does cover all the benefits that one receives, and therefore one should have that in mind as well. Regarding an Avel during Shiva, he does recite the blessing of Sha'asa Li Kol Tzarki, even though he does not wear leather shoes, and the reason is because other people do. So again, you're not just blessing God for your personal benefit, but for the benefit that's around for the world. Tisha B'Av Yom Kippur, nobody's really allowed to wear leather shoes. Ha-mechin Metzadei Gover. Ha-mechin Metzadei Gover is a blessing that it's the next step of the one beforehand of Reika Otz Alamayim, that we're able to walk. And as we know, spiritually, Mechin Metzadei Gover is going on that we bless Hashem for taking us to all areas of the world, or all areas of the city, or all areas of our lives with Hashgacha Pratis, with divine providence. That wherever we go, that is with divine providence, that Hashem took us there. This is hinted to in Ha-mechin Metzadei Gover. Hashem prepares the steps of man, prepares for us where we will walk. The next bracha of Ezer Yisrael B'Gevura. The bracha of Ezer Yisrael B'Gevura is said upon wearing a belt. It's meant actually on the belt, which is meant to separate one's heart from the lower extremities of the body. The lower extremities of the body they represent, walking and reproduction, and have a natural taiva, lust involved in them, and a Jew has to separate his head from the bottom part of his body. So that's represented in the belt. Interestingly, it doesn't write here any difference between men and women, and I don't know if all women wear belts. I don't know if all men wear belts, but I think it's more common for men to wear belts than women. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, women don't have to wear a belt, right?
Right, so even not all men wear belts. We already said that the custom is to say the bracha on the general, custom of the populace. But nonetheless, even our clothing tend to, stick onto our flesh. They grab onto our flesh and they serve as a chatzitza, so to say, to separate between the two parts of the body. And therefore, that itself would fulfill this idea of Ezer Yisrael B'Gevura, of separating the two parts.
It would be hard for a pregnant woman to wear a belt.
Right, that's true. Basically, what the Alter Rebbe writes here is that when a Jew wears a belt, or a Jew wears two pairs of clothing, one on top, one on the bottom, it's not just to wear clothing like a guy does, but it's to keep separations between the different parts of the body. The bracha of Eiter Yisrael B'Sefara. This bracha is going on, anyone know? The head covering the head. And here too, we are blessing Hashem, just like the first one, we're blessing Hashem for giving us the insight of separating between the top and bottom part of our body, that our lives are not controlled by our lusts. So too, the second part, Eitzah B'Sefara, is going on the pride of the Jewish people. We thank Hashem for giving us Jewish pride, which is represented in the specific form of dress of a Jew, that when he places a head covering, whether a man a yarmulke or a woman a head covering as a married woman, it's done as a sense of modesty and holiness, to draw down fear of heaven, and not just for the idea of casual dressed or etiquette in the society. So we bless Hashem as well for that. It's brought down actually that if a person buys a new hat, a male or a female, that they bought a new hat, then they should wear it before they say the bracha of Eitzah B'Sefara that morning, and have it count for the hat. Because some place can say that you have to say this bracha whenever you buy a new hat. So I would say the same would apply with a sheitel. So the best time to wear a new sheitel would be right in the morning before Eitzah B'Sefara, and then have it in mind.
Why would a single girl say that bracha?
What's that?
A single girl, she's not.
Right, so we said before that in general it goes on the general populace of what the general populace does. And it is also true that it used to be back in the day that single girls covered their heads. In Yemen, if you go to Yemen now, you will see that the single girls, the Jewish girls, cover their heads starting from the age of Bas Mitzvah. It happens to be they get married not too long after, but it's they cover their heads regardless. Hamavir sheina me'ena yisum afapai until agem chasadim tevim is considered one long bracha. The beginning of the bracha is hamav. It's in other words, it's a long blessing. It has an opening and has a closing, and because of that, we do not say Amen as Rabbi Shulchan Aruch until after the closing is finished. If people don't know this halacha and they answer Amen, so don't say it out loud. Only end it out loud, so then they can say Amen on the end. But they can't say Amen in the middle because it's still in the middle of the blessing. The beginning of the bracha is going on. It actually says that it's going on removing the drowsiness from the eyes when a person washes his face in the morning, washes his eyes, removes the drowsiness from them. And it's part of the process of waking up. The rest of the blessing deals with different. Hagem Chasadim Tovim is dealing with different kindnesses that Hashem does for us. It's also a prayer. We ask for Hashem for different things in the bracha, in this blessing of Yehiratzin. And it's actually brought down the following, and one should have this in mind when they say it, that biblically, a person to fulfill the mitzvah deraisa of prayer, according to those who hold it biblical, the Rambam, a person doesn't have to daven shachar, mincha, or ma'ir. A person can say any individual prayer requesting things from Hashem and thanking Hashem. And this is fulfilled in this paragraph. So in essence, when we say, as part of the rabbinical blessings, the paragraph of Yehiratzin Ufanecha, right after Mavra Sheina, which is right the second half of that blessing, we are in essence fulfilling the biblical command of prayer. And women should have this in mind, especially because if a woman is not davening Shachris or Mincha due to being, busy with the household, which she has the right to do, nonetheless, the reason why she has the right, because she fulfills her biblical mitzvah where? Right here. So she should have in mind, obviously she would have to say brachas in order to do that, and she would have in mind to fulfill her mitzvah of davening in this very short little prayer. We praise Hashem, we ask for some requests, and we praise Hashem again. That is the sandwich of the Shemoneh Esrei. Thank, ask, and thank again. It should be followed whenever we ask people things also. It makes a lot of sense, right? First praise them, get what you need, thank them for it. Okay. Now we get into the turbulence. The turbulence bracha. Shlei Sanigai, Ovid, and Isha. What are these blessings? Why do we say them? And if you're a guy, you're going to get offended. If you're an Ovid, you're going to get offended. And if you're a woman, maybe you're going to get offended. Why do we say these blessings? What are these brachas about? Aren't all people created equal? Why can we bless God for being higher or greater than someone else? So the truth is that we all know in society, those who don't want to believe it today, so we can go back 1,000 years, pretty much in all world history until about 200 years ago, or 300 years ago, there were different hierarchies in society. It's a fact. Whether you like the fact, don't like the fact, it's a fact that there were slaves, people who were slaves, and someone who was a free man had a very great advantage, a social advantage over a slave. And as well, men and women were not equal in culture. In fact, based on history, Jewish women historically had greater independence and education than the Gentile women. But even so, in the Jewish world, the level of education of women was a lot less than men. Women wouldn't go out as much, wouldn't have the same social atmosphere as men would have. Again, things today have changed, but when these brachas were instituted, this certainly was still the case. There was a very big divide socially between men and women, and men were viewed more as the stronger part of the society. Despite that historical fact, that's not the reason why we say these brachas. We don't say these brachas because back then, we believed the Jewish people, we have a godly soul, so we're higher than the Goyim. So, Jewish pride, we're better than the slaves, and a man had a higher social standing than a woman. That's not the reason why. The reason why these blessings were instituted is simply because of the fulfillment of mitzvahs. This is what's recorded in the Paiskim, and what's recorded is as follows. A person who has received a certain obligation of mitzvahs from God should thank God for receiving those commands. What is the matter compared to? A person, when it's explained in Chassidus that when a very prestige individual, a very famous individual, asks you to do him a favor, even though technically you can say, I'm doing something for him now. He does nothing for me, and now I'm doing something for him, so I'm one up on him. On the other hand, the fact that this famous individual even considers your existence to the point that he asks you to do something for him already gives you such a feeling of pride and self-confidence that no one else could have, that years of therapy wouldn't have given. So the idea that someone so powerful and great even asks you to do something is already a prize. Asks you to do something for him is already a prize. And the idea is that a Jew thanks Hashem for receiving mitzvahs, that Hashem gave consideration to us and asked us to do these mitzvahs for him, to build him a dwelling place below in this world through our commands, and therefore we have to thank Hashem for that. It's only fair to thank God for giving us this ability of serving him. And the more mitzvahs we have, the more we have to bless. So that's why we have all three. A guy is not commanded in the 613. He only has 7. So therefore, we say, we all say, Shalei Asani Guy, to thank Hashem for receiving mitzvahs. A slave does not have, a Jewish slave, which would mean a slave which was purchased by a Jewish owner and then converted. A little background to understand this. According to Jewish law, when slavery was still intact, going back, maybe 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago. It's not clear when in Europe, Israel, Babylon, slavery became pretty much illegalized. Anyone know? We know the United States, we know Africa. But in those areas where the Jewish settlements were, the idea of an actual Eved Kanani, which I'm going to describe right now what that is, it wasn't really around anymore in the times of the later Rishonim and the times of the Achronim. In any event, the idea of a Jewish slave according to Halacha is that you would go to the slave market, you would buy a guy, a slave, and he would then convert. He would convert. So he would become kind of Jewish. I mean, if you convert kosher, then you're Jewish. But since he's a slave, it was a slave conversion. It was a conversion that basically, even though he's a male, he wouldn't become obligated in all the Torah mitzvahs. He would only become obligated in the mitzvahs that women have to do. He would have the same level of obligation as women. All positive commands that women are exempt from, let's say shayfer or putting on tefillin, so too the slave would likewise be exempt from those mitzvahs. He was like a half Jew, so to say. And then when he would be freed, if his master ever decided to free him for whatever reason, say the slave wanted to make aliyah, according to Halacha, the slave wants to move to Israel, you have to free him, so then he would become a full-fledged Jew. But during that interim stage, before he become a full-fledged Jew, he wasn't obligated in all the mitzvahs. Now, just like all slavery begins with someone being bought and then him having children and those children being born into slavery, so too, a person could have been born as a slave, and for this we thank Hashem. We thank Hashem every day, Shlei Sani Yavid, that we were not born as a slave, we were not born into slavery, and we therefore are obligated in more mitzvahs than is a slave.
Did they have a bris?
Absolutely. Sure. You have to do a bris to a slave. A male slave.
So it doesn't have anything to do with Mitzrayim, being slaves in Mitzrayim?
No. You could have that in mind. It's a nice thing, thanking Hashem for not being a slave in Egypt, but that's not the halachic reason of the inception of this bracha. The reason is simply due to the, again, we can also explain it based on societal differences. It's not the reason recorded. The reason recorded was simply having to do with, even if everyone was exactly equal in society, like pretty much today, there's no more slavery, and there is no more distinction pretty much of men and women.
There is, by the way, a lot.
Of what?
In Africa and in the Islamic world.
Well, I think I've touched upon this point before. In Africa, officially slavery is illegal everywhere in the world, including Africa.
Illegal?
Illegal, yes. I am not aware, and educate me if I am wrong on this, that there is any country today that legalizes slavery.
In the Arab world, it's okay.
It legalizes. There's a difference between the governmental laws and what people do. Yes, there are people in Arab countries that still have servants, but the question is, to what extent, to what level. At least I know for certain in Africa, what I've read at least is that it's illegal. In those small countries in Africa that still practice slavery, they're doing it pretty much against the law. Just the government doesn't do anything about it. In other words, they accept slavery, and even there, a lot of times the slaves are actually, they like their job, they like their master, they enjoy being a slave. They don't know any difference of life. And in fact, when the BBC did a study in one of these small African countries right on the west coast of Africa, where slavery is still practiced but illegal but practiced, and they forced legally and put pressure that one of the masters would free their slave, and a year later the slave came back and he said, I'm not managing the free world, I like it much better by my master, and he has to be accepted back as a slave. So the slaves want to be slaves, the masters want the slaves, they have good relationships. It's not like we think, today they paint such a horrible picture of master-slave relationship as if, they're all being whipped and beaten and tortured. It's not true. There were many masters who were very kind to their slaves, especially in Judaism. There's many laws that obligate the relationship between a master and a slave. It's not always this idea of, that a slave is someone who's oppressed. It's not always true. We don't have to buy we don't have to buy that reason in all cases. I'm sure there were cases of bad masters, just like there's cases of bad parents and bad employees. An employee relationship can also sometimes be kind of similar to slavery. Just that by slavery you sleep in his house, in the master's house, and there you sleep in your own house if you're not sleeping in the office because he wants you to do an overnight job. But slavery can manifest itself in many different ways. But slavery isn't always mean. The idea here is that we're not talking about the idea that we can move around and be free and go to the beach when we want. The bracha is going on the mitzvahs, that we can go ahead and fulfill mitzvahs that slaves cannot fulfill.
Why did we have to convert slaves? What's the reason?
I'm not aware right now of what the reason of why the Torah obligated an Eved Kanani to be converted. Perhaps it's simply so you don't bring Gentile culture into your home. Don't forget, the slaves are living in Eretz Yisrael, and so if you're going to become part of your family, a slave really is becoming part of the Jewish family. He's like, there's a son, which is a biological child, and there's a slave, which is an extension of your possessions. So I guess for that reason, the Torah required that there has to be a conversion process that takes place. I mean, we just read in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Bay, anyone who owned a slave and did not convert that slave, did not get a bris mitzvah, the slave couldn't eat the carbon pesach. Now the Jews, I don't think the Jews had any slaves in Egypt. They were the slaves. But nonetheless, the mitzvah is that later on, if anyone owns a slave, they have to convert their slave. Their slave has to do a bris milah in order for the master to be allowed to be able to eat from the carbon pesach. So there was this conversion process. Nonetheless, as the generations passed, as we know, slavery became abolished, and this entire idea of slavery no longer exists, even according to Halacha. The Chabad Shulchan Aruch has a whole chapter dealing with an Eved Kanani. There's about 70 halachas there, dealing with a slave. And today this is all obsolete. Even if a person entered into a relationship with someone who said, I agree to be your slave. It's completely consensual. I want to be your slave, you want to be my master. I don't know if there is such a thing, but these things are done even in the United States. It's consensual slavery. And people have crazy, whatever. In any event, so according to halacha, it doesn't work. It doesn't apply anymore today because since it's illegal, the official concept of a slave, the halachic concept of a slave, is not relevant. And that's why today a mamzer has a big problem. It used to be a mamzer would be able to go to Africa or anywhere else where slavery is legal. Or in the United States, a mamzer in the United States in the early 1800s buy himself a nice slave and marry her, have children, and then free the slave, because a mamzer is let him marry a shifcha. However, now that slavery is illegal, the poskim all right, even if you were to find someone and have entered this kind of relationship, it doesn't count. So a mamzer really has no takana today of how to purify their children, so they no longer continue the lineage. They don't have a restriction of marriage. In other words, they are able to marry certain people, but their descendants will remain mamzer. As we always follow the psul, we always follow the invalidation. So even if they marry a convert, their children will still remain to be mamzer, if either the mother or the father is a mamzer. The only halachic way of what's called the taher, purify the descendants, what it was in the Talmudic times, or even the times of the Rishonim, when slavery was still around, to marry a mamzeres. The man would marry a mamzeres, and he would then free the mamzeres after having children, and free the children, and then the children are considered full-fledged Jews.
To get back to slaves, some of the personal support workers I worked with were Filipino, and for money, they went to Saudi, and they were captives there, and greatly abused by their masters, and they had a lot of difficulty. They had to go through different governments to try to get them out of there in a safe manner. But there is a slavery there. It seems to be practiced by them of foreign workers.
Yeah, there is definitely a black market of slavery in the entire world, including the United States. You know, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, but you don't have to go so far. The Western world also has it.
Saudi is closer.
It is closer, but I'm saying we would think that, you know, this is something, a problem of Saudi Arabia. There is people scream about underage marriage in the Arab world, and a lot of Americans scream that, and they don't realize under their own noses there is a huge amount of underage marriage occurring in the United States and slavery occurring in the United States in the black market. There is a black market. In any event, okay, let's move on.
How would one find out about that?
How do you find out about it? You read up on it.
Oh, where?
There are studies. This is not new information. You can read up on it. Shalei Sani Ovid. So, based on all this background that we gave, we can understand a little better what are we doing when we say Shalei Sani Ovid. When we're saying Shalei Sani Ovid, we are basically thanking Hashem for not creating us in the static position of only being able to do these amount of mitzvahs, and we're able to do more mitzvahs. Now, why do we say, well, I'll get to soon Shalei Sani. Before I do, why do women say this bracha of Shalei Sani Ovid? And also, why do men say both as separate blessings? Just say Shalei Sani Go, Shalei Sani Ovid. Why do we say them all as different blessings? If the idea is the same, that we have mitzvahs, we have more mitzvahs. So if we have more mitzvahs than an Avod, we have more mitzvahs than a guy, right? So the reason explains because there's actually an advantage and disadvantage of each one with regard to mitzvahs. You see, while a guy is not commanded in any of the 613 as opposed to a slave, a Jewish slave, nonetheless, a guy is able to convert and make himself eventually obligated in all the commands. So he has an advantage, a potential advantage over a slave. A slave is he's in the governance of his master. He can't decide to be freed. His master has to. A Gentile can decide to convert. So because of this, since in actuality the slave has more mitzvahs than the guy, we say Shalei Sani Ovid. And since in potential the guy has a greater potential than the slave, we also Shalei Sani Guy. Because Hashem created us with an advantage over both of these two. That we're both free and obligated in the mitzvahs. also regarding a woman, even though, as I said, the level of obligation between a woman and a slave is, a slave is obligated, a Jewish slave that converted, in doing the mitzvahs that a woman is obligated in, he's not yet a full-fledged Jew. He doesn't actually become a full-fledged Jew until he becomes free. That is the final process of his conversion. A woman is a full-fledged Jew, and obviously her mitzvahs that she fulfills has a much stronger effect and power than does the guy. Than does the slave. Shlei Sani Isha is going on in that same approach regarding mitzvahs. A man says Shlei Sani Isha. Women do not say Shlei Sani Isha for obvious reasons. Right? Even though we're laughing, but there were women who would say this. They just didn't know any better. They would say Shlei Sani Isha, and the person you have to write, no, you cannot say Shlei Sani Isha.
They didn't know what it
Not
meant.
always women were literate. They didn't always know what they were reading. So they just read all the brachas, Shlei Sani Goy, Aved, Isha. But so women obviously cannot say Shlei Sani Isha. Do they say something in its stead? So we'll discuss that soon. But before we do, let's just go a little more in depth into the Shlei Sani Isha. So this bracha that's said again is not due to social, a social inequality. It's because of the idea of the mitzvahs. A man is obligated in all 613 and all the positive commands, even the time-dependent ones, while a woman is officially exempt from the time-dependent commands. And since we have that additional obligation, which we said before is the idea of the king or the or the very prestigious individual asking you to do something, you thank him for even thinking of you. So since we have an additional amount of mitzvahs where we are thought of, we therefore thank Hashem for that. In Shaloi Asani Isha. So when people ask, and a lot of people do, especially people that aren't brought up with this indoctrination of Shaloi Asani Isha, and it's very new to them, especially with Western culture. They take it they feel hurt. Why do the sages make such a bracha? It's, to put it in their perspective is, we understand historically, and there's no one more than the feminists that highlight this to the whole world, that there were inequalities in society between men and women in previous times, and so someone from the outside can feel Shlei Sani Isha is coming to emphasize that inequality, saying that men are actually more equal than women, therefore Shlei Sani Isha. So the answer is to take them to the sources. And listen, in the sources, that's not what's the reason why we say this blessing. The blessing is a matter of thanking Hashem for the mitzvahs we receive. Men have mitzvahs that they're commanded and that women are not. Men have more mitzvahs than women, and therefore they thank Hashem for those mitzvahs by saying this blessing. It's not going on anything else. Even though you can also say, well, it's also true men don't give birth. They don't go through the pain of childbirth. Maybe we should thank Hashem for that as well, right? Right? Maybe we should thank Hashem for that. It's true, but that's not why it was instituted. It wasn't instituted for that reason. It's instituted simply because of the commands.
That's pretty inoffensive. I mean, understanding it like that is pretty inoffensive.
Yeah, it's a technical matter of, if someone gave me a cup of milk, I'm going to say thank you to them, and someone else who didn't give me a cup of milk shouldn't feel offended that I didn't say thank you to them.
Right.
If someone chooses to be offended by that, that's not my problem. It's their problem.
Thank you for not giving me milk.
All this is based on Halacha. Based on Kabbalah, the Matzah Shmurim, which was a major Kabbalist, a Talmud of the Arizal, and it's recorded in the Magen Avram, he gives two Kabbalistic reasons. One of them is recorded in the Alter Rebbe, the second isn't. We're going to give both reasons. And they are as follows. According to Kabbalah, this is going on something totally different. These three blessings. Halacha, as we said, has to do with thanking God for the mitzvahs that you got. And according to Kabbalah, it has to do with the fire. It has to do with the souls. That when a person goes to sleep, his neshama goes up into heaven. And heaven is not just like one place. We don't all go hang out in the same room. It's not one room. There's many, many, many different words, areas, worlds, and places too that the neshama goes to. And because of this, it's possible for the neshama to go hang out where all the Gayim are, or all the Yidden are, or all the Rishayim are, or all the slaves are, or we're in the woman's room, and a male neshama or female neshama in the other places can receive some effect by these other neshamas that were with them. This is called the idea of a dibuk. Now, not to get too scared, dibuk, the way they really they highlight the idea of a dibuk where you're taken over by another spirit, and like you are now possessed, you have no expression anymore, and that's the very extreme cases of a dibuk, where hopefully no one will ever experience. But there's a lot lighter cases of dibuk, which is we are who we are, but we suddenly have weird mood swings, which we don't know where they come from. And we spoke about before the levushim, but there's another reason, and that's called the dibukim. The dibuk is basically when an aspect of another type of soul has basically cleaved onto your soul. And where does that happen? When you go to sleep. The neshama goes upstairs, gets into conversation with some slave, and he says, "Okay, guys, got to go down," and then the slave jumps on the bandwagon. So this is a dibuk of an eged, or a dibuk of an isha. If a man wakes up with a dibuk of a neshama of a woman, he'll be more feminine that day. If a man wakes up with a slave's neshama, or dibuk of the slave's neshama, he'll be more in tune to, slavery? I don't know. With a guy, he'll act a little more like a guy. He'll have a guy's neshama. Gimel klipas atmeis. His tivus will be harder to control. So every single morning, based on Kabbalah, we thank Hashem for not attaching to our soul any of these dibukim. Now, obviously, this would still remain with what we said. Women don't say the Bracha Shelo Yisani Isha because they are a woman's soul. Now, why don't they say Shelo Yisani Ish based on this? If we're saying from the aspect of the mitzvah, so the men have more mitzvah, so it wouldn't make sense from the Shelo Yisani Ish. But if we're saying from the aspect of the dibuk, is it healthy for a woman to wake up with a male soul? Or a male dibuk of a soul?
How would one know?
How would one know? Well, I don't know if it's healthy or not healthy. But one thing's for sure is that we do find that when it comes to dibukim and gilgulim, there's a major difference between men and women. While men are more prone to gilgulim and dibukim, women are less prone to it. And that touches on the next explanation of the Matzah Shmurim, which is not recorded in the Alter, but is recorded in the Matzah Shmurim, in which he states that it's not a little similar, but a little different than the first explanation. It's not going on the dibuk, but going on a gilgul, meaning as follows. Every single morning, we thank Hashem for placing our soul into the body, not placing our soul into the body of a guy, a slave, or a woman in terms of a gilgul. Now, because it is possible, as written in Shiur Gilgulim, that a Jewish soul can be reincarnated into the body of a guy. It's happened. There's many stories written there regarding Goyim that had neshamas of Jews. In fact, a lot of Gerim, the idea of a Ger is someone who had the neshama of a Jew, and now because of that is being drawn to the Jewish people because of his Jewish neshama, and wants to express itself and enter a Jewish body, so he converts. He doesn't understand the subconscious pull, but that's what he's coming from his Jewish neshama. So to a slave, today I guess it's kind of difficult unless we go with the black market. I don't know if they follow the black market in heaven of gilgulim into slaves, but it could be. And a man can be misgalgal, reincarnated in the body of a woman. It is possible, and the Arizal explains in Shiur Gilgulim different dysfunctions of society that were around even back then, because of this mix-up of female souls and male souls and female bodies. However, a woman is brought down doesn't really go through Gilgulim. It's a lot more. There's other criteria followed. The general rule is women don't go through Gilgulim. They come down once, and there are exceptions made if their spouse yet didn't finish his Gilgul, meaning their first neshama, their original neshama. The Ziva Grishim, right? They're what we call Basheret in Yiddish, right? The Ziva Grishim didn't yet fix it, and sometimes the female does a favor. So what the reason? It says the female does a favor and comes back to be with him for him to try again. And this can also explain why we find, the Talmud and other places, describe how you have some marriage relations where the woman is just very bitter against the husband, and it doesn't make any sense. No one can understand why. Sometimes because why is she here again? It's because of that guy, because of the husband. Why does she have to come back here? So there's an inner bitterness. She's here in the world to begin. There's many stories in the Gemara relating to these points. In any event, okay.
Can I ask a question? There is this trend, some people who change their sex because they transgender.
Right.
I know some people are religious, and what bracha do they have to say?
A male is a male, a female is a female, no matter how many times he tells himself otherwise. The same way an apple is an apple is an apple is an apple. It doesn't matter if I paint it like an orange. So a male is always a male, and there's, the fact that people want to think differently and people want to think of themselves differently because they went through some kind of change doesn't change the fact that they are a male. Now, even though in halacha, this is a discussion, halacha, of can a person changing his, there's two types. There's someone who goes ahead and he does what's called he changes his genitalias, and a person who just dresses or doesn't change his genitalias, in which it would be different issues in halacha, different discussions in halacha. The bottom line is that from a halacha perspective, in the end of the day, a man remains a man always, a woman is a woman always, and therefore whatever they did before they went through this change, they would continue to be doing according to halacha now as well.
But I tell you, being a nurse in a nursery, an ICU in Toronto, I've seen. I saw a baby who had both.
Androgynous, yeah.
And they did genetic testing on it to decide what it should be, to do surgery right away so that the child wouldn't end up with the confusion.
Right. That's called an androgynous in halacha. In the Talmud, it gives it. In the Mishnah, it has a very it's not a male. So really, from Talmudic literature, there's three genders. There's a male, a female, and an androgynous, which is a suffix. It's not maybe male, maybe female. It's its own type, and that's why he follows male and female laws in different areas.
That's why they did hormonal tests on it to find out, with certainty what the problem.
There are tshuvas. There's a tshuva that sits Eliezer on this, dealing with the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, and they wrote exactly about this case scenario.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're referring to genetic testing. What the doctors basically do is that they decide about what's more practical from surgery. That's what's written there in the tshuva by the head of the hospital, Shaarei Tzedek.
Really?
This was a tshuva in the 1980s.
Yeah.
It could be things have changed from then of how they decide these things. But yes, they would, depending on...
This was before the 80s.
Well, this was in the 80s. It's true. In any event, so they would decide based on what makes more sense surgically. They obviously can't wait very long. They had to do this right away. So you can't wait to see where is the child.
Yeah. Right.
Is he more
I
feminine?
think it has to be. I
masculine?
think it has to be done by maximum 18 months because that's when gender identity socially really kicks in, even before that.
This was in
Bottom line is that in halacha, in Talmud, in Judaism, we definitely find a concept of gender confusion. It's it's discussed in all the Mishnahs when it discusses mitzvahs. What is the mitzvah of androgynous for shayfer? What does androgynous have to do for tefillin, getting married? So the concept is definitely there. I mean, it's not very common. I don't know how often androgynuses are born today. I think it was more common back then, because from statistically, it's hardly ever happens. It's very rare the cases.
Yeah, right.
Very, very rare.
I only saw it once.
It's so rare that we would understand why the Mishnah would never discuss it. I mean, there's so many more common things that the Mishnah doesn't discuss. But it seems that back in the day it was more common. The Arizal explains that these are all due to different tikkunim of neshamis. Different sins can cause neshamis to have a gilgul into. And he explains this also what can cause a male or female to have a lust for someone of their own gender as opposed to the natural way of the world. It has to do with dysfunctions of the soul, or gilgulim, of a dibble, of a male or a female. These things can affect. In any event, so we bless Hashem every morning for not making us with all of these problems. So shalei yasani goy, shalei yasani yovel, shalei yasani isha. And what an interesting question is that I was once asked is that how do we know we actually don't have these dibbukim in us that morning?
Right.
What right do we have to say the bracha? Maybe it's a bracha levatala. How can we say it? So as one mashpia once told me that the fact that you were able to go ahead and say the blessings, that's a sign that you're good. you're good to go. You're able to manage to have to say it. If one day you realize, I had a really bad day. I forgot to say brachas this morning. I sketched Shalei Sani Goy, Shalei Sani Ovid. Maybe there was a bit of a dibble there, yeah.
נשאל בעברית זה בסדר.
כן.
הברכה בבוקר כשאני אומרת ברוך שעשה לי אישה, אני מאוד נהנית לומר את זה בחיוב, וזה מעלה לי שאלה, למה לא אומרים ברוך שעשה לי יהודי, ברוך שעשה לי חופשי.
What's your intent that you say Baruch Shasani Isha? You say with Hashem's name? But there is no such bracha. Where do you read such a bracha? It's in your siddur?
In my siddur? Yes.
What is the bracha? What does it say?
ברוך אתה השם אלוהינו, מלך העולם, שעשה לי אישה.
It's a siddur for a man.
שעשה לי כרצונו.
Shasani, maybe you mean Shasani Kirtzono.
I'm not sure.
Do you have your siddur with you? Let's look. So okay, next week bring your siddur. I'll be glad to look at it with you. But
Anyway,
I want to get to after we're going to, as soon as we're done with this, we're going to get to the alternative of Shalei Sani Isha.
but the question is the same. Why are we blessing in a negative way? Why not in a positive way?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything on that. I haven't seen. I don't know. But clearly that's the nusach as recorded in the Gemara, and that's the nusach that we have to say. Person who changes in Pesha Tov Chachamim, it's a Bracha Levatala. So I'm sure there's a reason why it's said the way it's said. I haven't seen the reason, but I'm sure there is one. Whether we know or don't know, and therefore a Jew has to follow this nusach. Again, we're going to get soon to the alternative for Shalei Sani Isha. Before we do so, let's just talk a little bit more about the Goy and Ovid blessings. A person who, God forbid, is in captivity, would they actually say Shalei Sani Ovid or Jewish slave? So it's brought down that based on everything we explained, that it's not a social. Shalei Sani Isha, right? So, right. So, okay. We'll get to Shasani Kirtzano soon. We'll get to that soon. So since the reason is because of mitzvahs, a person who's in captive or enslaved, and he still has mitzvahs to do, it doesn't change his mitzvah status, so we would still thank Hashem. Regarding a convert, what does a convert say? Can a convert say Shalei Sani Goy? On the one hand, it's kind of a lie. He was born a guy, and when he converted, that was his own choice.
But he was always
Blessing Hashem.
He was always a potential.
Okay, so say something else. How can you say Shalei Sani Goy? So because of that, there are Paiskim who say, basically everyone agrees, from halachic perspective, that he shouldn't say Shalei Sani Goy in the Paiskim. We'll get to the Mekubalim soon. In the Paiskim, he shouldn't say Shalei Sani Goy, but some say he should say something different, which is Sha'asani Ger in the positive. You wanted positive. He should say Sha'asani Ger. That is what some Paiskim rule. The Alter Rebbe brings both of the opinions, while others say that he can't say Sha'asani Ger because Hashem didn't make him a Ger, he did. He converted. It was his decision. So how can he say Sha'asani Ger? So we have basically one opinion says you can't say anything, another opinion says you should say Sha'asani Ger, and now we have a third opinion based in Kabbalah. We already introduced the reason of Kabbalah has to do with Gilgulim or Debukim, and based on that, right now, today, this Jew who converted, this guy who can now a Jew, is thanking Hashem for not having a Dibble or a Gilgul of a guy. So, therefore, his blessing is just as good as any other Jew's blessing. And practically, Halacha L'maisa, a convert may choose to say this bracha. He can follow the Kabbalists if he wants, or he can follow the codifiers and not say it. But if he wants to follow the Kabbalists, he may do so and say, just like any other Jew, the blessing of Shalei Asani Goy. Regarding the nusach for woman of these two blessings, of Shalei Sani Goy and Shalei Sani Ovid. So, some women have the custom of saying Shalei Sani Goya, which is more female tense, and this custom is recorded in the Chidah, and the Yavits. And those who have such a custom, then that's what they should do. The widespread custom is to simply say Goy. That's also the Chabad custom, simply say Goy, but some do say Goy, and that's okay. Regarding Shelo Yasani Aved, so there are some women who use an interchange for the female word of Aved, which is Shivcha. So they say Shelo Yasani Shivcha instead of Shelo Yasani Aved. Anyone know anyone who says that? Anyone say that? So there are people who do it. A lot of Yerushalmi women say Shelo Yasani Shivcha. And those who do so have upon what to rely. That is a base custom. The Rebbe was once addressed this question. He was asked, should women say Shelo Yasani Shivcha? And the Rebbe basically answered what the truth is. It depends on the community custom. So if that's the custom you were brought up with, that's what you should say. Otherwise, you would say Shelo Yasani Aved. Okay, now we're up to Sheyasani Kirtzayne. So should women say an alternative blessing to Shelo Yasani Ish? So they don't say Shelo Yasani Ish, because we already said based on Halacha the main thing is the mitzvahs, and they don't have added mitzvahs, so they can't say Shelo Yasani Ish. But should they say something else? So it's written in the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber brings it, and the Shulchan Aruch, the Rebbe brings it, that women are accustomed to say the blessing of Sheyasani Kirtzayne, that Hashem made me according to His will, which is basically saying that it's called Matzti Kadim, that even though I wasn't created like a man, that I'm obligated in all the mitzvahs, in that itself I'm thanking Hashem. I'm thanking Hashem for making me perfect the way He knows that I need to be made. Similar to the idea that just like you have to be happy when you have the ability to fulfill a mitzvah, so too you should be happy when, according to Halacha, you're not allowed to do a mitzvah, because that's how you do the mitzvah, by not doing the mitzvah. In other words, everything is b'hashgacha prata, so therefore you thank Hashem for Shasani Kirtzayni, for being made in the way I was made, in which I am exempt. It's something the Rebbe really emphasized to negate some of the very mistaken philosophies of the feminist movement, which is that trying to make women do the same things as men. As men and women were created with different functions, different capabilities, and different purposes in life. And a woman shouldn't try to take a man's, and a man shouldn't try to take a woman's. And when they do that, then they are not being neither a man or neither a woman. They're not being any. They're being an androgynous. They're not being either. A woman was created with her function and with his function. So Shasani Kirtzayne is emphasizing that point, that we're thanking Hashem for being made each in their own image. Do we actually say it? Is it the Chabad custom to say this bracha of Shasani Kirtzayne? So if you notice in the Tilas Hashem Siddur, it's not printed, this blessing. Is it? Right?
No.
It's not printed. So you will notice it's not printed. In a lot of other Siddurim it is printed. What should be followed? What's the proper thing to follow? So in the 1970s, in Crown Heights, there was a big ruckus about this question. I'll tell the story of what happened. Beis Rivka, which was the girls' school that opened, I think, in the 40s, in the name of Rebbe and Rivka, so relating to Yud Shvat, or passing away, Yud Beis Shvat, or Yud Al Shvat. So Beis Rivka, the custom over there of the teachers was to teach them to say Shasani Kirtzayne, to say this blessing. That records in the Shulchan Aruch. And in the 1970s, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Pesach Bogomilsky, Moshe Bogomilsky's brother, wrote an article in a journal that was publicized at that time, saying how basically we should not say, Chabad women should not say this blessing, because the Alter Rebbe didn't write it in a siddur. The fact that it's omitted from a siddur seems to point that women shouldn't say it. And therefore he was basically pushing that Beis Rivka school, which is basically the school educating Lubavitch girls, should change from their protocol. And this caused a big ruckus and a lot of defense of the custom of saying this custom. Who came to the defense of women saying it was an individual by the name of Shalom Merazov. Shalom Merazov was first in his own right a tremendous Talmud Chacham, a brain atzum. He was a mashpia. He was one of the Rosh Hashivas of Tinkley Tmin, the central Lubavitch Yeshiva. And his family was very close to the family of the Rebbe Rashab. They were neighbors. They actually grew up. The kids grew up with each other. He was friends with the Rebbe Rayatz. They grew up together. And so he says that, my sisters, all my sisters and my mother, there's no way in the world that they said these blessings if it wasn't done in the home of the Rebbe Rashab. So this is the Lubavitch minhag. We do say Sha'asani Kirat Sinai, and he was pushing for it to be said. Bottom line, they wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered that each person should do like his community, basically saying that there is no 1 cent thing. So you do have a Lubavitch women who do say it, you do have those who don't say it, and everyone can stick to their guns, and there's no one right or one wrong way. Rabbi Zalman Shimon Dvorkin, he wrote that the widespread custom is for women not to say in Lubavitch, but as we already said, nonetheless, there are women who do say it, and that's okay. They can continue doing so if that is their minhag. I'm sorry, to be, in this specific question, to be a little more detailed than what the Rebbe wrote. The Rebbe wrote, ask the elderly woman of Anash. That's what the Rebbe said. Ask the elderly woman of Anash. He didn't say ask the Rabbanim. Well, the Rabbanim, no, they're not saying the Bracha. Ask the elderly woman of Anash. And this was, many women of Anash said, like Shalom Erazim, but they do say, not even, okay. So both customs have a source and can be followed. There is an interesting custom brought in the Trumas Hadeshen, who was one of the great Ashkenazi Rishonim, and he says that his mother was accustomed to say the bracha of Shelo Yasani Behema, of not making me an animal. I don't know anyone who says this today, especially it obligates a person not to act like an animal throughout the day. In order to say that was a joke. Nonetheless, Shelo Yasani Behema it's an extinct version. I don't think anybody says it anymore, but there were people who used to say it. Okay, we're almost done here with the morning blessings. We're just going to cover a few more halachas that are left. We discussed a few times already regarding the subject if you have to receive the benefit from the blessing in order to say the blessing. And we said that while this matter is debated amongst the Rishonim, for example, the Rambam is of the position you didn't receive the pleasure, you can't say the blessing. So no physical rooster crowing that you heard, no hanaisin asech vivina. Didn't walk this morning, you stayed in bed, no mechin mitzadei gover, because you didn't walk, or no rekar salamayim. You didn't wear a belt, no oiz yisrael begvura. You didn't wear a hat, no eit yisrael b'safara. You didn't wash your face, you're tired, sleepy the whole day, no amavir shena. The Rambam takes a very strict approach. All these blessings are blessing God for pleasures that you got. So if you didn't get them, you can't say them. Just like you can't say shachtim yebedvar if you're not eating anything or drinking anything. The second and third approach, we can say that one shouldn't rush to a decision just because the Rambam ruled that way, because we have the opinion of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, rules that a person can say a number of these blessings based on the benefit of the world, and so was the opinion of Nachmanides the Ramban, and that is the custom today even amongst Sephardim. And even though the Mechaber and his Shulchan Aruch ruled like the Rambam, that you can't say the blessing unless you get the benefit, the Sephardim practically follow the Ashkenazim in this matter, the Ramah. And all Klal Yisrael, we all say the blessings whether we got the benefit or did not get the benefit. This is one example where the Sephardim swerved from the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, of their Marad Asra of the Mechaber, and followed the minhag of the Ashkenazim, of the Ramah. Nonetheless, as the Pasuk concludes, the Alter Rebbe concludes, it's initially best to be stringent like all opinions, which would mean try to get the benefit before you say the morning blessing. You didn't, it's okay, that's the custom, but you should try. So let's go through this. So what does this practically mean? So what it practically means is that you should try to sleep every night for at least 30 minutes straight. So you can say L'kai Neshama in the morning. Number 2, you should try to hear a physical rooster. So you can say a nice lasach vivina. This is one of the more rare ones that's able to be fulfilled. This one's a tough one. Put on a shirt so you can say mal b'sharumin. Don't sleep in your clothing. Placing the hand over the eyes, which is the idea of opening the eyes, is bekaf ivrim. Cleaning the eyes. Sitting on the bed is matir asurim. Standing up is eikif kafufim. So these pretty much we're all doing anyways, because we're saying brachas out of our beds. placing the feet on the ground. There's a discussion in the Paiskim regarding what if you're on a ship or a plane.
Mm-hmm.
So some say that a ship or a plane is not really Reika Ha'aretz Alamayim. So according to the Rambam, if the Rambam was on a plane, he wouldn't say that morning until he lands the bracha of Reika Ha'aretz Alamayim, because he's not on the ground. Leather shoes. We should try to wear shoes that are made of leather. That's a real reason to try to have leather shoes. You have today's shoes made of all types of materials, and that's fine, minadin. But going, as we said before, going on the trying to fulfill like everybody and make the Rambam happy also. So we would have the leather shoes. Walking is hamechem etzadi gaver, putting on the belt we already said, and putting on the hat that's going in the two brachas of Ezer Yisrael B'Gur and Eiter Yisrael B'Sefara. Washing the hands in the morning is Al Tiyas. Washing the face is a Mavir Shena. So we say that before. So Mavir Shena is wash the face. And Shalei Sani Gai Avid Anisha, that's just waking up. There's nothing more added to that. That's just the fact you woke up and you moved around. You already got those in. Okay, we're just going to summarize a few last halachas and we're going to conclude for the day. If one did not sleep at night, we went through this in bits and pieces. We're going to summarize that right now. If a person didn't sleep at night, there are disputes regarding certain blessings. Those blessings are al natilas yadayim. Should it be said? Should it not be said? It's a machlekes. Is a machlekes also regarding kind of shama. Machlekes regarding hamav r'shena me'enai. Practically, our custom in Chabad is that we say all the blessings, including al natilas yadayim, with exception to Asher Yatzar. We mentioned this last week. If you didn't go to the bathroom, you don't say Asher Yatzar. But all the other blessings we do say, even if you did not sleep the night before. The one restriction to this is that you can only say the blessing starting from Alois Shachar, which is 72 minutes prior. It's fluctuating in Zmanis minutes prior to sunrise. You have to look at a calendar. If you're up all night and you want to say brachas, you cannot say it before Alois Shachar, because the whole reason of why we're allowed to say brachas if you didn't sleep the whole night is based on the reason of the Rosh and the Ramban, that we're saying it on the custom of the world. Well, the world doesn't begin its custom till it's time to wake up, which is after Alois. So you have to wait till Alois. You can't say it early. So there's many opinions regarding when is daybreak. You have to follow the latest approach. So even though we mentioned a few times regarding fast days that we follow a very early approach of when is day, morning, and we stop eating before that time, according to the Alter Rebbe, regarding blessings, we have to be stringent on the opposite end and delay it for the latest approach possible of when the morning starts. So that would be the normal alais written on the calendar of 72 minutes. That you would wait to say the morning blessings till then.
So when can we say morning blessings?
Until what time? Right. So where did I discuss that? Where's that coming up? Okay, I have to look where I put it. But bottom line, the answer to that question is that the morning blessings may be said halacha l'maisa until sunset. Some Pesachim, this is a dispute. Some Pesachim say you can say it until you go to sleep that night. That's the Gruz opinion. Meiser Rav says you can say till you go to sleep. Probably you can say till sunset. Others say you can say till Chatzais, till the 4th hour of the day. That's the Mishnah Berurah. Sometimes we rule you can say till sunset. You can say the morning brachas. It's no longer the morning brachas; it'll be the afternoon brachas or the late afternoon brachas. But you would have that time. But the ideal time, as we already mentioned, is specifically in the morning. That's the main obligation, thank Hashem for the benefits, and the rest of the day is only what's called tashlumin. It's called make-up blessings. It's no longer fulfilling the main idea of the blessings. Okay, we have a few more points that we're going to leave for our next time, and then we're going to begin the laws of Birchas HaTorah, which is its own subject regarding being said. Okay, thank you for coming. Everybody should have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
very
Enjoy
interesting.
good Shvat, and then we have Tu B'Shvat coming up.
Will there be a shiur next week?
Yeah, Mirz Shem, we're going to do a Tu B'Shvat shiur.